Welcome to Imprint, a podcast about creating a home and life you love. I'm Natalie Walton, an interior designer, stylist, and best-selling author focused on an holistic approach to homes. Each week, I'm sharing insights and interviews about the creative process to help you enhance both your interiors and well-being, as well as provide you with the tools and resources to make considered and sustainable choices with all that you create. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Imprint. Wow, I am so excited to share today's conversation with you. It is a good one. You really want to listen to this. I know it's long, but trust me, it is worth every single word. I am joined today by Anastasia Casey. Some of you may know her through her top-ranking podcast called The Interior Collective. She has had guests on there such as Jake Arnold, Amber Lewis, and many, many more high-profile interior designers. She also has a design studio called IDCO Studio, IDCO Studio. And this studio is responsible for the websites of some of those leading interior designers, including, again, Amber Lewis, Nate Burkus. She really recently worked on his website. And so she really gets to get an inside look at what is happening in the businesses of these very high profile customers and clients that she works with. Plus, she has a twice a year camp called Design Camp. And again, she gets very high profile guests. So she has got so much insight, not only from her own business and how she has grown that to a team of 22 people, which is just amazing, to also getting a sort of behind the scene look at all of these other incredible businesses too. She is a wealth of knowledge, incredibly generous with her time and her expertise. And I just know that you're going to love this conversation as much as what I did. All the show links will be added, and you can go to the website to get links to those as well. So please enjoy my conversation with Anastasia Casey. Anastasia, I am so excited to have you on the podcast. I have got so many questions for you. I am a huge fan of your podcast, The Interior Collective, and love what you do with your business, IDCO. And we're going to get into all of those things, but I always like to start at the beginning and to kind of get a little bit of an insight into you, your story, what type of home you grew up in, where you grew up, and always interested in that time in our lives when we're probably sort of teenagers coming up to the end of high school and having to think about what am I going to do when I finish school and go out into the world, and having to make those decisions about jobs. So can you start at the beginning and give us a little bit of an insight into where you grew up and your story so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I love that you asked this question because you ask from the very beginning. And I'm always asking people, how did your career start? And I think that what's so interesting about you is that you're really looking to understand who someone is as like a human and how that has really come to fruition. So if I go way back in time, I grew up all over the West Coast. My dad worked for Pepsi Cola and he was just kind of climbing the corporate ladder. So I was technically born in San Francisco and quickly moved to Seattle, Washington. I lived in Scottsdale, Arizona, and then in Los Angeles. I went to university in San Francisco, and about 12 years ago now, my husband and I moved to Austin. From then we were just dating and living in San Francisco. But my homes growing up were always being worked on. My parents are like the original DIYers, but on a very heightened level. My dad is a very skilled craftsman, and has taught himself everything. And my mom has a wonderful design eye. She has always had beautiful taste and an incredible ability to put things together that are very affordable, whether it's because she made them or sewed them herself or sourced them secondhand. And they were always very thrifty, but our homes were always, I just look back and it always feels like I grew up in a house that was in a magazine. That said, Saturday mornings as kids, we were required to work on house chores. And it wasn't like, oh, go mow the lawn. We would pull staples out of the wall in the hallway because the wall had been covered in fabric when we bought the house and my mom wanted to plaster it. So we were always doing some sort of a DIY project. And that's really how I grew up. It's funny because at the time, interior design was just like definitely not something I thought I was going to get into. That's not what I thought I was going to go to school for. Um, I mean, it wasn't what I went to school for, but I kind of didn't even think of that as a career path. It sort of just seemed like a way of life. I honestly didn't realize that people would go to someone else to decorate their own home because I grew up with really creative and talented parents. And so in high school, I was on yearbook and I really thought that I was going to be a magazine editor. Like that's the direction I thought I was going to go. And I ended up going to a private art school in San Francisco for university and ended up in their advertising department with a minor in graphic design because it seemed like the most accurate and direct way to magazine editing. And while I was still in school, San Francisco is a very expensive place to live. I needed to get a job. And so I took a graphic design marketing role at a commercial real estate firm that paid pretty well. And it kind of just put me on the path of assisting real estate. It introduced me to the world of really people having a lot of money. And so I started there while I was still taking classes, and I end up really pricing pricing myself out of San Francisco. My then boyfriend, now husband, and I met in the city and we just kind of got priced out of San Francisco. He went to school at Texas Christian University outside of Dallas and thought I was really going to like Austin. And I came for a visit, and me being who I am, I had lined up like 12 job interviews on the first time I ever even came to visit the town. And 3 weeks later, we moved cross country. And so we've been here ever since. My actual story of how I started the business. Um, After I'd been in commercial real estate, the job I moved here for was director of marketing at a luxury real estate firm. This was for residential real estate. And this is when I first really experienced like high end, beautiful homes. And there's a long sob story of that. But after being there for 3 years, I got another job offer. I talked to my boss about it because I loved where I worked. She fired me on the spot for being disloyal and called the person who gave me the job offer and had them retract the offer. So, in the matter of 10 hours, I had two job offers on the table and then I had none. And I remember walking out to my car after I got fired. I called my dad before I even called my husband. And was just an utter shock because I felt like I was really doing the right thing, like being open about it, talking about it. I hadn't even made a decision yet. And I just told my dad, I don't know if I could ever work for somebody else. Like I gave them my everything. And then the next day I posted on Instagram to my, I don't know, 3,000 followers. If anybody needs a website, like I can help. And in the first month, I made my entire year's salary at my previous job. And I just
Wow.
never looked back after that.
Wow, that's amazing. And what I love, and this is why I asked that question about you growing up, because now it makes so much sense that you have grown up in these homes that have been created with love, and you know that was such a huge part of your childhood. And even though you kind of went down the sort of advertising and real estate path, you know, it was very much this creativity was all around you and it was all centered around the home. So that's why I'm always curious to see, you know, there must be these threads. And I do really believe that there are these threads throughout our lives that sometimes when we're in a particular season, we think, you know, what am I going to do? Or, you know, what are my skills or where should I go with this? And then it makes sense when we look back in retrospect to see, this all makes sense. So
Yeah.
it makes sense for you that you ended up working, you know, predominantly with interior designers with their website. So when you initially put that call out to do web design, were you getting interior designers then, or were you getting a whole range of different people wanting web design? And then how did you decide to specialize and niche down with interior designers?
This is one of my favorite stories because I get emotional talking about it. It was the most transformative like moment of my life, and I can absolutely pinpoint it. Initially, I was getting types of creative entrepreneurs. There was wedding planners and event rental companies and hair salons, and I really enjoyed all of them. I was lucky that I was attracting creative entrepreneurs. I primarily focused in catered my messaging to women and female entrepreneurs. And Fiona Humberson, who's based out of England, she's called the brand stylist and very well deserved because she's a genius at what she does. She was hosting this beautiful work retreat in Mallorca, Spain, and she was promoting it, gosh, 10 months ahead, and there was like a payment plan option, and for $300 a month, or I guess 300 pounds a month, I could put towards this and get to go on this retreat with her, who in my field, like, she's the best of the best of what she does. Everything's so beautiful and romantic and so strategic and well thought and organic. And I talked to my husband, and we were my business was doing well, but it was still just me, and it was a big investment. It certainly was. And my husband, who's the most supportive, perfect husband in the whole world, was like, absolutely, you have to do this. So I put my 300 and whatever change pounds towards it, and I went to Mallorca, and the retreat was beautiful at this beautiful villa, and it was very warm and fuzzy. It was very touchy feely, and I'm not that person. And I remember sitting through, psychology session number 18 of the 4-day retreat, just being like, I am not fully invested in this. Like, I'm not completely getting it. I was hoping for really like tactile, actionable plans of how can I be better at what I do. And the whole time she's telling us that we have to pick a niche. We have to decide who our target's going to be, and that's who you have to serve. And I remember for a moment, I remember resenting her and feeling like, I understand and appreciate that you have a partner who can financially cover you if you're turning away work. But I was like, I'm not in that position. My husband was working in hotels. We did not have money. And I was in one of the last sessions of the whole retreat, and they had us do an exercise and said, write down your 5 favorite projects you've ever done. And so I wrote them down, and 4 out of the 5 of them were interior designers. And in that moment, I got it. It clicked. I like absolutely had like an emotional breakdown. I'm like, this makes so much sense. Those are my people. And I want to shout out Clara at Banner Day, because she was that first interior design client that I feel gave me the opportunity to even be on the map, like even to show up. She was the one that made me fall in love with what I do now. And she's still a great friend and a great client. But the rest of, I think I had another 24 hours there, and I rewrote every bit of copy on my website and changed every single Instagram post I had scheduled to go out, and never took another client that wasn't an interior designer or in the shelter space. And that was the pivotal moment in my career when everything changed.
Wow, that's amazing. And so, how long ago was that? And then, how has your business evolved since then?
Yeah. So I was in business 2 years at that point, or very close to 2 years at that point. And so that was eight 8 years ago now, 7 years ago now, that I went on that retreat. And the business has evolved and is constantly evolving. We do a lot of things. I definitely consider myself a designer at heart, and to me, design is not limited to physical spaces and interiors or digital spaces and websites. I really find myself being creative in all of these different assets. So From that point, we started working with interior designers. I was still just doing custom work. So, someone wanted a website, everything would be totally custom. We'd go through that process. It was me, and I had one good friend who was freelancing for me at the time because we were getting a lot of inquiries. We quickly realized in order to scale, we were going to need to have some things that were partially done. There was going to be need to be some sort of product or some sort of template that we would work from, and I never wanted to provide any sort of a custom client something that started as a template. Everything was always going to be from scratch no matter what. So that's where IDeco Studio and the shop really came about. We launched with 3 website template designs, and Julia Miller of Yond Interiors, we went on sale at 12 o'clock. She bought at 12:01. She was our first client ever, and I'll never forget that feeling of seeing that first purchase come in. And Lexi, the person who was freelancing for me, quickly came on board full time at that point, and we started expanding into other offerings for interior designers. It was website templates for a long time. And a few years ago, we started doing pre made brands where there'll be a logo suite that we've already put together. And then we limit that to just being purchased 3 times. And then we go in and customize it. So it lets us skip ahead of a lot of the legwork that goes into a custom project, therefore making it like much more affordable. And so we released that. And then we started releasing more templates that are sort of business tools, whether that's welcome guides or design proposals or pre written email bundles, all of those sort of things. It just kind of kept evolving from there. And somewhere along the line, we um, launched Design Camp, and that's with Lindsay Borchard of Lindsay Brook Design. She had been a marketing client of ours and a website client of ours for 2 years at the time. And we were together in Las Vegas at the Las Vegas Design Market in January one year, talking about my retreat experience and how that changed my destiny, and how much we would love to host people and have a place where there can be comfortable conversations about money and make it very tangible and not as woo woo as I call it, but still have warm fuzzies. And we just thought it would be such a great idea. And then not 6 months later, we launched our first one. And it was at a very small boutique property that had 7 or 8 beautiful little rustic cabins. And the guests bunked up. Almost everybody shared a room. And it was very much summer camp type vibes for a few days. And we loved it there. It was so amazing. I'll never forget that first group that came through. But financially, that property was very expensive and hosting it was very expensive, and we could only get 14 guests. Lindsay and I didn't even get to stay on property. We had to drive from my house like 40 minutes every day. So we had to expand it, and we had to figure out a way to keep the magic of that small intimate group on a larger scale in a way that we could dedicate the immense resources we do from each of our teams to make it happen. And so after COVID, it was actually during COVID, it would have been January of 2021 of 2021. Yeah. No, 2022. January of 2022. We had our first design camp at the proper hotel in Santa Monica, and that was like 60 campers. And being at a larger property where they could handle the catering and the rooms, we obviously had unlimited rooms. It became scalable, and it sold out in like an hour, and it has just kind of grown from there. We're at a very sweet spot now that we don't want it to get bigger than where it is, because we break everybody up into smaller groups based off of their year's experience in business or how long they've been operating their design business, so that you still have roundtable discussions in a small group, even though we can accommodate a larger number of people. So that's really the 2 key parts of our business. And then we have kind of smaller branches off to the side as well. Quinn Made is our boutique agency. It's just what we've always been doing at IDeco, but only the custom stuff. And we just have a different name for it to not cause confusion for people who are looking for a custom project. If they've been in business for, decades, they don't want a template. And then we have our lifestyle blog, which showcases design projects from our community all around the world. And that's just a passion project that we have to to give voice to designers who don't have 100 million followers already and are trying to get their work published.
Okay, so many questions. So first of all,
Okay.
a huge one, a huge one is for so many interior designers is around pricing and how you price your services. So I'm wondering for you, when you were first starting out, how did you decide? Because obviously, when you're very first starting out, like you say, you want to take anything and you're gonna happy to do anything, and you kind of want to be competitive and you want to be really cautious of not pricing yourself out of work when you're first just trying to get a portfolio up and running. So how did you work out what to price your services as, and how has that evolved over the years?
Great question. When I very first was starting, I literally worked out how much money do we need to make rent this month? And I was like, that's what I'm going to price this project at. So I believe my very first projects were, I don't know, $3,500 or so, which is a fair price. And it was just me. And it was, that helped. That covered our rent, which was all that I cared about at that time. And so I initially, didn't have the develop. I mean, we have an amazing full-time staff developer now that can custom code anything. At the time, I was using website builders that, many people can DIY, and they were looking at me to help write the copy and make it look beautiful and just take it off their plate. So I don't advise this for everyone else, for designers listening, but I do think that there's a lot to be said about pricing your own services based off of what your overhead is. And in order for you to be operational and in order for you to do this job, you have to hit that number. And so you can then divide that number based off of, okay, realistically, how many projects is it going to take for us to hit that number? Is that just one client? Then great. If is that 4 clients because you're going to take on smaller projects, then perfect. So I've always been flat rate. I am very happy to divulge my theory on interior design pricing as well, because I've studied it a lot. But for us, it's always been flat rate. And then when someone wants additional changes or revisions to their site after we've wrapped, that's always just done hourly. And we're very happy to do that as people need it. Where we are now, our website templates that are ready to plug and play, those are $2,800. You can pay an extra, I think it's 1480 for us to plug and play it for you, and we can implement it for you. And then we also have our custom projects, like we just launched Amber Interior site. I'm still pinching myself that we got to do that project. And custom projects are usually starting at about $20,000 for a full custom build, from the ground up with branding. And so that's kind of where we're at. And so we've created 2 very clear different buckets. And I think that that's something that you can definitely take away in your interior design business, that there's no question when someone's looking at your service offerings as to what is the right place for them, because $20,000 could be an automatic no for someone. So they're very confident in the option of a template, and maybe they have a little more. So they want us to go ahead and execute it for them, but they're certainly not at that $20,000 range. Someone else might look at the template version and say, I definitely want something completely custom, and 20,000, that makes sense. We're going to have this site for 5 years. That comes out to $4,000 a year. That's very much within our wheelhouse. So I think that when you're thinking about pricing your services, you want to have no more than 3 core offerings, and there should be a very sizable jump between each of them.
Yeah. Okay. And so what about then leads? So like you say, you had about 3,000 people on your Instagram, you put it out there, and you got a whole bunch of different types of projects. Then you started to think, okay, now I'm going to niche down to interior designers. How did you keep getting the momentum, and where were you getting your leads from? And again, how did that start? And now how does that look?
So, I mean, every time I interview someone on our own show, I hate hearing this, but it's true. Instagram was a super different place at the time. Instagram, you could post a pretty picture and it could be nice, bright, and airy, and it would perform well. And you could use hashtags and you could be discovered. And that's just not where it is now. But I was in that realm. I was on the app and using it as a professionally, at this point, almost 10 years ago. And so right away, I purchased really high end stock photography um, to start attracting what I felt would be a female entrepreneur interior designer. I'd get really beautiful interior stock photos and I'd focus a lot on the content and the captions, making sure that it was inspirational or informative every time. And then not too far beyond that, I'd say within the next 6 months, I booked my first branding photo shoot with Madeline Harper, who I still work with today. And I used a local space. I paid for 2 hours to get in there and we did a full branding shoot. I changed outfits 100 times and we did, me at my laptop and me doing all these different things to get those really Madeline's a beautiful photographer and there's just a warmth and depth to her work that I feel so blessed that we were just kind of both in the infancy of our businesses and we've just grown together. But I had really beautiful pictures and I showed my face. I think that that's a big part of how I grew back then is I wasn't afraid to do headshots and make them fun and post them and move on. Um, but those those were the two key things. And then I quickly started. I remember my little rental house. It was like 500 square foot bungalow that I don't know if I can say this on your show, but an SHIT hole. It was a it was a really run down rental. And I had worked with an interior designer who was a client. I believe we did a trade that I helped her on our website and she would help us like do our living room and kitchen. And, I had a very small budget and Raina had just finished it. We just got it installed. So I had Madeline come over and shoot that. And the Every Girl picked up my house and that definitely got me some followers there. And then I was like, got it. So like I can have nice stuff too. And shortly after we bought our first house and I documented that and was very much a home goods thrift store doing it as I go and I just grew my following through that and I think naturally that following grew into being interior designers. Those were people who were my age who, were buying their first homes and after their first home they got interested in doing someone else's home and those people really became my target audience. And after probably 2 or 3 years of putting content out there and scheduling. I had monthly shoots with Madeline. I invested a lot of money in photography. I think that's when I kind of had earned enough street cred or portfolio work, if you will, to start booking not necessarily designers who are my age and start booking some of the more prominent or well-known names in the industry after, just being in the grind for a while.
Yeah. And it's really interesting as well, I think, to sort of, I mean, you've got such an incredible behind the curtains look into other interior design businesses. And I'm definitely going to be pulling some information out of you in relation to that. But so you've talked about, obviously there was this kind of a lot of organic reach with your business. A lot of people struggle with, I think, like you say, they get stuck with people who are on a similar income bracket and how to push through to that next level. So, do you think there was anything specific? Like, was there a tipping point or getting a particular client? Then that started to help get some more of those bigger clients on board. Because I think, again, this is something that interior designers struggle with. It's like, everyone doesn't value my services. And I guess that's another big part of the component. How do you see that evolve for you, that sort of going to those higher paying clients who really valued your service and you not having to kind of really try and not push it upon them, but really educate them, I guess, in a way about, what the value of what you do is?
So I think the answer to this comes in twofold. The first answer is I was showing up in those people's spaces, in this case, in Instagram, and being very visible to them by actively engaging with them, replying to their stories, replying to their posts on Instagram, and really just being available and supportive to them. I'm fortunate that I'm in a business to business setting. And so I can offer an interior designer support, advice, connection, because I've grown a community, which is obviously a little different than an interior designer who's listening. But I think that one of the key things we do when we're working on marketing clients of our own who are interior designers is we really pay attention to actively engaging in their community on social. And so if, for instance, new restaurant in their like dream neighborhood is open, you need to make sure that you're going on there, liking and seeing who is liking and engaging with that new restaurant that opened, and then following those people and engaging with them. You just have to like meet someone where they're out at and stop expecting them to meet you where you're at. So that was the first thing. And it takes work and it takes time, and I feel so fortunate because I'm so passionate about it. I just get to look at beautiful interiors all day, and like that's my marketing. I get to go and comment on beautiful things. But the second thing is having your processes in place, and taking the time to write out your process and present it in a really professional manner, so that the moment that someone knocks on your door and is like, "Hey, I'm interested in talking to you about working together," and where you might feel like, "Oh my gosh, this is amazing. I don't know if I'm ready," or like, "Why are they talking to me? There's way bigger designers out there." You need to be ready to present yourself as polished and professional as whoever it is you think that that person should be talking to. And so I've always been very very confident and comfortable in my process. I know it inside and out. Even now, when I have a team of 22 people, I can do everybody's job at my company if they need to step out for a day. And I think that that's key in my ability to articulate why we are so qualified for the job. And I think that as an interior designer, you need to think of it in really the same way. You need to have everything that you're able to present to your potential client, both verbally and visually, because realistically, there's two key decision makers in every project, whether that's partners, a married couple, business partners, whatever that might be. One of those people is probably very visual and attracted to the work that you've done, and the other person is going to be much more analytical about the process and concerned about the budget. So you want to make sure that you are hitting both of those in your initial presentation to someone. So in your initial investment guide, there needs to be beautiful pictures of your work or inspiration of your work, and there also needs to be very clear, black and white. This is how I work. This is why I'm going to make this so easy for you. This is why you need to trust me, so that you're appealing to both people in the decision making process.
Love that. That's such a good tip. So, before we get into the interior design insights and tips that you've learned through working with all of these interior designers and through Design Camp, I want to talk a little bit more about your business and how that's grown. Because as you say, you've got 22 people working for you now, which is just phenomenal. What were some of those first hires, and how did you create the systems and processes to make that possible? I mean, at the moment, we have got a new hire, and I mean, we thought our SOPs were robust, but we're finding all the gaping holes in them. And, it is a process, and it's something that I hear so often. It's easier to do it myself. What would you say to that person?
I think a lot of times it is, until you realize how much it isn't, until you realize how much time that's actually taking you up from you. I need to preface this with, I work with the very best, most generous, most talented, hardest working people. I have found almost everybody via Instagram, almost everybody who's come to work for our company, with the exception of our now studio director, who was a referral from someone who worked with us. Um, I feel like, and people tell me that I attract these people because of what I put out there, and I have to admit that that probably is true. I think that people want to come work for us because they can experience and understand a little bit of our company culture, and I think that they also know that I have really really high expectations, because I am willing to do anything to get the job done. And so I expect everybody else to. And I've just been so lucky that almost everyone has completely lived up to that challenge and exceeded it in well beyond my wildest dreams. So my initial hire was a friend on Instagram who had invited me to be, this shows how long I've been doing this actually. She invited me to be in an engagement pod. And if you don't know what an engagement pod is. That was like 10 to 12 years ago on Instagram. There would be a group of people in your DMs that if you posted a post, you'd send it to this engagement pod DM, and everybody in that pod would like and comment on that post to help boost your engagement. And so she was a fellow graphic designer and web designer out of Tupelo, Mississippi, and invited me to be in this group. And this group became my virtual coworkers very quickly. They were amazing and really shared so much. Um, and Lexi and I became extra good friends. Everybody was good friends, and she and I just really hit it off a little bit deeper. And when I was starting to get a lot of inquiries and needed extra help, I freelanced work out for her. So she started helping. We had built our processes together. So it was a very natural fit for her to step in and understand how I was doing things. And then from there, Lexi was still freelance and we hired Aaron. Both of these people are still with me. And Aaron was really handling all of our editorial. So we've always had some sort of a blog and have always been putting out content for free for people to consume. And Aaron was in charge of that. And then Aaron started offering social media management for some of our clients. And then each of them needed more help. And then we started a new realm and brought on additional people. Of the 22 that we have, there's 14 full-time employees. There's 3 full-time contractors, and the rest are part-time contractors. I take a lot of pride in employing working moms who are home with their kids and can work, 25 to 30 hours a week, maybe not 40 hours a week, but they can do their job in that amount of time. And so it really was just about finding I very rarely had to post a job offer. Um, and it has been people who came to us that felt like the right fit. So, what I've worked to at this point, there was years and years and years of nights that I was working till 3 in the morning, like doing the deliverables, whatever needed to get to a client, I was the one doing. And Lexi was at her house in Tupelo, Mississippi, up at night till 3 in the morning with me. And we are now at the point where I go to bed at a regular time and everybody clocks off at a regular time because we have enough hands to get the deliverables done. And I am no longer responsible for any client deliverables. I oversee everything that goes out the door, but it is no longer my job to code that website or redesign that layout. It's my job to keep the business coming in and keep the business running.
And so what does your sort of day in the life kind of look like, your week in the life? I know that often that can change on a day-to-day basis, but give us a little bit of an insight to the rhythms. I always love hearing about, what is the reality of what your work looks like now.
So we'll start with a Monday because I feel like Mondays are my most formal of days. Mondays, we have our one meeting a week. We only do one meeting, and it lasts about 15 minutes, maybe 20 if we have a lot to talk about. And I've pre-put together an agenda and I've sent it to the 3 team directors, and they all put their due dates for the week for their team and any sort of notes that they have in this agenda, and I run through it. Everybody's on a FaceTime call, or I'm sorry, like a Google Hangouts call. We all get to see each other's face. We celebrate anybody's birthday that's that week, and then that wraps up. Immediately after that, I spend the next 30 to 45 minutes reviewing anything that our CFO has sent over. So, any transactions that needed categorized, or if they're missing receipts from our bookkeeper, I just go ahead and time block that because I will avoid that like the plague. Like, if it was up to me, I would never have to look at a receipt or a QuickBooks or anything. And so, I just put it on the schedule right away so it can get off my plate. And if Brittany's listening, she's going to call me on my BS and say, you might have that on your schedule, but I'm still waiting on those receipts. And then after that, our whole team, we have an office here in Austin. There's 4 or 5 of us who are in this office when we feel like coming in. I work in the office every day because I like having a separate space, but our team is very much remote and all over the country. We have a designer in London and a designer in Croatia. Everybody else is spread around the US. So we're very Slack focused. Like all communication in our company happens on Slack. No one is allowed to email me within the company. Emails reserved exclusively for clients, and we keep everything organized in Slack. That is like the biggest productivity tip I could give anybody is that your team should not be emailing you about anything. And so I'll usually pop in right away to review anything that particularly our European designers have already been working on because their work hours obviously are, earlier than mine. And so I'll usually have work to review right away and I'll spend about an hour doing any sort of reviews with that. And then I really look at what's coming up in the week and I kind of start to dig into there. So let's say that it's during podcast season. We don't have our show run year round. We usually do about 2 or 3 seasons a year. So I'll get any of the interview questions prepped. Those take me a few hours. And then I'll get everything prepped and sent out to the guest, or most often it's to the publicist that's working with that client. And then we have recently launched our podcast on Patreon, which has like a lot of additional like coursework and downloads. And as of right now, those deliverables do fall on me, and I'm working to figure out who else it can fall on. But as of right now, those because I'm the one having the conversations, I've found it's easiest for me to put that together because I understand what conversation was had and kind of the nuances that should be documented in the coursework. And then honestly, the rest of my day is truly spent managing the team and reviewing work that's going out. Even though I don't have direct deliverables for clients, I very much have opinions about the work that goes out to clients. And so there will be brainstorming sessions and I'll have quite a few revisions with the design team before I'm okay with them sending that out. And then if we're onboarding a client, we'll have an onboarding call, which usually takes about an hour. And I'm almost always on those. And somewhere in there, I'm also reviewing the blog content for the week and getting all of our social clients scheduled out for the week. So the majority of my day is truly just reviewing other people's work. And as the team says, sprinkling my sauce dust is what they call it, my nickname, and sprinkling my little fairy dust at the very end of the project so I can go in and take all the glory.
So it sounds like there's a lot of overlap between how you run your business and how an interior designer runs their business, in the sense of you're meeting clients, you're onboarding them, maybe you're even filtering who you're going to be working with. I'm sure you get lots of inquiries about the custom sites and how you choose to filter those, like who's going to be best for you to work with. I guess you've got, everyone's got limited bandwidth in terms of who you choose to work with. Can you shine a little bit of a light on what that looks like? The pro, connecting with a client, deciding who you're going to work with. Maybe do you do an initial call to see, is this the right fit? And then, how do you interact? How do you manage? Is it just email? Do you use Asana or some other project management tool to sort of see how the project progresses? Let's have a look at that part of your business.
Perfect. So the onboarding process is we have pretty strict processes that we follow from start to finish. But I do feel like we are so good at our processes now. I am learning mostly through my interviews in the podcast that I'm now at the point where I can understand where to bend those rules to make the best possible client experience. But I will take you through our process, assuming that there's no leeway happening. So, when someone first inquires with us, most of the time, hopefully, they're coming to us through one of our websites, either IDECO Studio or Quinn. And those inquiries go to the same place and are handled by the same person. So, it's a very recent addition that we've actually brought my husband on the team. I avoided it for years and years and years, thinking we could never work together. And it's actually been wonderful and glorious in a happy fairy tale story. But, Quinn's now handling all of our onboarding. So Quinn will receive the inquiry that's come from one of the two sites and he'll know which one it came from. And there's very general questions like, are you looking for help with social media? Are you looking for help with branding or website? Or are you looking for like a product support situation? Like if they purchase something and they just need help with something that they purchased. And that will always lead to an automatic reply from Quinn that has our investment guide that talks through all of our processes, has our starting at prices. Like, here's kind of the ballpark of what you can expect, and a link to book a 20-minute complimentary consultation call. And someone that's all automated through a program called Dubsado. And I've used Dubsado from the very beginning. I love Becca and Jake, the founders of it, dearly. I cannot recommend Dubsado highly enough, but that is our client management software. So that's all automated. Someone gets the investment guide. They're like, okay, great. This is like in the realm of possibilities. They book a call, and my husband Quinn now takes those calls. Quinn will help advise them as to your needs sound like we definitely need to do custom. You know, you're launching e-commerce, you are introducing a brick and mortar, you have a YouTube series, whatever it is. He'll say, that sounds like it's going to be a custom project. Or he'll say, we want to make you something super fabulous and super custom, but I think we can start with one of our website templates and just add implementation and customization so that you don't need to spend more than you need to spend. And so Quinn will help advise where the best place for that person to go is. And then most often with one of the really custom projects, they'll then book a call and I'll be on that next call. And I'll sit and talk them through what our process looks like, what they're really getting for their investment, because it's a lot of money to work with us. And for a totally custom project, I mean, that can be a 4 to 6 month project, which I know is not a long time for interior designers, but it is a long time for a graphic or web designer for sure. And so I'll go through that. Once they've said, great, thanks for the custom proposal, this number sounds good, we'd like to get on your calendar, through Dubsado, they'll get a contract along with their invoice. So when they receive their virtual contract, they'll read it, they'll sign it. Automatically, Dubsado will prompt them to pay their deposit, and they can't close that window out until they paid the deposit. So before somebody even gets on our books, they have to have paid their, usually it's a 25% deposit is typically how the payments work out. From there, we don't have this automated because sometimes it does take some more personalization, but the templates are already in Dubsado. We will apply their client homework. So their onboarding questionnaire, I know interior designers have those too. It'll have 80 to 100 questions about their brand, about their goals, about their vision, technical questions like who's your domain host? How do we get access to it? We need a link to all of your portfolio projects. We need bullet points for your portfolio projects. And that homework usually takes them about 2 weeks. Once we've received it, our studio director will review all of that, put all of the kind of the Cliff Notes versions and links to all of the long versions in the Slack channel for that client so that our design team and our copywriting team can review it. And then she'll go ahead and book the initial kickoff call. So the project kickoff call is different than that initial consultation call. That initial call, we're just kind of like feeling each other out. That's especially for these custom projects. I've noticed there's been a lot more business partners slash men involved in these calls than like historically. And I have to admit that has taken me more practice to get used to, because I feel like they ask a lot more questions and kind of I have to like prove myself every time I'm on a call with a male client. And so we kind of go through that vetting of like, yes, I know what I'm talking about. Yes, this is a real company. Yes, I know what WordPress is, and like go through all of these things to essentially win them over. Luckily, most of the time, we will, in our contract, make it really clear who it is that we'll be answering to from the client side. And we make it really clear that our instruction, our approval is from X, Y, and Z person. And I usually try to make it that it's from the designer and not who this business partner is, because I don't love having to get feedback from so many parties that at the end of the day, it's the interior designer's business and not, you know, this husband that's helping out with the project. Um, Once they've completed their homework and we've had our kickoff call, There's a 3-week turnaround for us to present our creative direction, and almost all of our presentations are done live on a call. We don't have a ton of Austin-based clients, so we actually have never done an in-person presentation. Everything's always been like on Google Hangouts or on Zoom. But that'll be live. By the time we've hung up the call, our studio director has sent a PDF version of the presentation. And so there's a copy of what it is that we presented, but we had the opportunity to present it in real time and had a little more control over it. And I definitely think that that translates over to an interior design business as well. Don't hand them a PDF or don't hand them a packet of things that they can flip through ahead of you speaking through it. Guide them through the full presentation, and you're going to have a much higher success rate. With that digital PDF that gets sent as we wrap up our call, in Dubsado, there will be a feedback form. So that's where they can submit their revision requests. That's where they can ask any questions. Most importantly, that's time stamped and signed at the bottom. I feel it's so important in business, especially in interior design, that you are getting signatures on everything because there's a lot of money involved and a lot of opinions change as someone sees something and they like and they might change their mind because they, were at a hotel or saw something on Pinterest. So everything in our business is time stamped and signed. This is where I had mentioned that there can be a little bit of leeway in our process as we're working with, the amber interiors of the world. Um, if there's a small change that someone's asked for in the midst of the next phase, we won't always require a signature at that point, and we're happy to accommodate those change requests at kind of that phase. But for the most part, for the general overall approval of things, I like everything to be signed, and that's what makes Dubsado so great is that you get signatures collected at every step of the presentation. So from creative direction, we'll go into usually whether it's branding or website, we'll go to kind of the first phase, initial concepts. And just like with interior designers, then we'll have 2 weeks before the revisions are presented. And then we'll have the final version and we'll have 2 rounds after the final version. Pretty much everything that we do gets 2 rounds of revisions. And rounds of revisions could mean 3 things were changed, or it could mean we were totally off and it was 27 things that were changed. That still is considered a round of revision for us. Anything after those 2 rounds of revisions, at that point, all gets billed back hourly. And so 2 rounds was included in your flat rate. And then anything beyond that, we're super happy to do. But obviously, we have to protect our time.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So now I want to get into, well, first of all, your tips on website design, branding, and you talk about you do social media for clients. So some of your big tips for people who either new to interior design or they're still in that kind of early-ish kind of stage. What is important about a website for an interior designer?
I think that a website for interior designer is kind of it goes back to what I was saying before that you need to be presenting yourself in the most polished professional way possible because there's typically going to be two decision makers in the process. And if for instance, if partner A is the one who saw you on Instagram or saw your work because you had a home tour on Rue or whatever it is, they loved your work. Partner B is the person who's going to be like, okay, I want to know more about what I'm investing in. And without a website, that can make it really difficult to do that. Without a website, it becomes really hard to kind of back up what you're saying. And I think that's where you're going to be making the most compromises and giving the most of yourself up to your client because you don't have that clear process documented. You don't have that visual backbone that your website can really represent. And so I think that an interior design website does not need to be super complicated. I mean, it's a portfolio site. I think there's really like 5 key pages. You can have your home page, and you'll actually see a lot of 8100 and Elle Decor A-list designers now are having super minimal homepages that are truly just a landing page with a gallery of their images and their logo. And then obviously your portfolio gallery, most people have a landing page for their portfolio gallery and then you click through to each portfolio project. But I am also seeing more and more designers showcase fewer images from each project and actually just put it into one mass gallery. And so that's an option that people have been exploring that have had um really a very established look and really beautiful, professionally photographed images that can really represent their work well. An about page, I really like this either being our story, our philosophy. It can obviously be called about, and that's where it's going to be about you, about your studio. This is also where you can break down your process, and I think that that's really important. I think people don't realize, but the about page is the second most clicked page on any website. And I think that's particularly true in a service based business like interior design. So, your about page should really be where you are setting those boundaries, explaining your expertise, explaining how collaborative you are, explaining how concierge level service you are, and how hands off the client will actually have to be. Whatever it is that makes your service really special, that's where you want to talk about it. Obviously, you'll have your contact page with either an embedded contact form through something like Dubsado, or it can just be, the one that's built into your website directly. Definitely make sure that you're always including an email address to contact you in addition to the form. A lot of people don't like to fill out forms, and by not providing a direct email address that someone can reach you, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities there as well. Also, forms can sometimes glitch, and you don't want to miss that potential inquiry because someone was on XYZ iPhone and it wasn't working from their phone. And then lastly, there's typically going to be a press page. I do feel like your press page can certainly live on your about page as well if you want to consolidate how many different pages you have on your website. But having that really helps with your SEO because every time you can click out to another website, it's validating your own website and your expertise.
I would love to hear from you on your thoughts about putting a button or some kind of link to do a discovery call on the website. What are your thoughts on that? Do you recommend that, or do you think that people should have the form, then filter people, and then do a discovery call? Or do you have a different approach or thoughts on that?
I think it totally depends on what like your workload is and your capacity for new work. So, if you are trying to get your first clients, definitely have that button ready on your website, book a 20-minute call. From there, you can have someone book a paid 1 hour call and you can at least get that sort of like onboarding flow going. If you have a steady flow of clients and you're more concerned about like what are the projects that are happening next, I do think having the automated email that gets sent after someone has completed your form, um, have that initial booking a call link makes sense. It's just like one step that protects you from looky loos, spam, that sort of thing, for someone to actually book that call. But if you are looking to get your first clients and need to be ramping up and are willing to take on one room projects, or willing to, just help someone pick out their tile and counters for their kitchen, then definitely have that booking link directly on your website. If you have a lower tiered service offering, virtual design, for instance, distance design, I definitely think you can put that booking link directly on your website as well, because that's something that you can crank out at larger capacity. And so that's definitely somewhere as well. One tip I do advise, if you are at the point of filtering your inquiries a little bit more, and you find you're getting junk inquiries, or you're getting inquiries that are, they have $5,000 budgets and you're really hoping to get people with $200,000 budgets. My biggest tip is on your inquiry form, you have a budget entry, and you ask, what is your budget? And instead of having it be a fill in the blank where they get to tell you what their budget is, it's actually a drop down option where you have ranges, because you can say the first range is 50 to $75,000, and then the next one can be 75 to 100, 100 to 150, 150 to 200 plus. And what this does is, if you're getting an inquiry from someone who has that $5,000 budget, they will look at those drop downs, and in a very subconscious and therefore polite way, it will tell them that, hey, this designer is probably not the best fit for me because I'm not in any of these budget brackets. And it can help you avoid that awkward conversation of, I'm so honored and flattered that you reach out to us. We aren't taking projects of that size right now. Here's a recommendation. And so it just will save you time in the long run if you can set it up that way instead of letting them fill in a budget, or worse, let them leave it blank and you have no idea what type of budget they're working with before you get on that call.
Okay, that's really helpful. Now let's just talk quickly about branding and social media. They're probably, there's a lot of overlap with those two areas, as with, web design as well. What are some of your kind of big tips that you would say to people when it comes to their branding in general and social media?
So we'll start with branding because I feel like it's a little bit more straightforward. And the concept of, you should have a professionally designed logo and font selected and a color palette. I think people get that. Like, they understand that. That can be anything from a brand suite that you pick out on Etsy, and you can find a logo for $50, to something that's more on the semi-custom level, like what we offer at the IDECO Studio Shop, where you can pick the one that you like best, and then our team designs the custom icon to go with it and really make it work for your specific business. Or you can work with a designer who really wants to get to know your business, your brand goals, can help you differentiate, like what you were saying earlier, Natalie, about wanting to break into that next economic bracket. A brand designer can help you present yourself in a way that's going to attract those types of clients versus the ones that are in your current economic bracket. But I think definitely having a primary logo, making sure that your brand designer is offering you at least 5 additional marks, meaning sometimes your logo can't be entirely horizontal. If you have a long name like mine, it can't always fit on one line in the different iterations you're going to need it. So you want to make sure that they're providing you a stacked version, a vertical version, the horizontal version, a color version, a white version, and that there's additional accent marks that are going to help tell that brand story and help depict the type of work you like to produce, even if you're still building your portfolio. And I think that's where the real power of branding is that you can evoke the emotion of your physical spaces in a digital form with really good branding. You can tell someone, you can show someone what type of work you do without ever showing them your work. And that's where investing in good branding will make all the difference. From social media, it's a different beast these days. And managing social media for clients has honestly been probably the most challenging part of my whole career, because it's really hard to tell someone that they owe you $2,500 this month to do all of their social media. And then the next month say, we can't show you that you grew, that you got X number of likes, or that you have 1 million followers this month. All we can do is show you that we produced quality, consistent content, because the algorithm has changed and the way that Instagram presents its content is different than it used to be. So, for someone who's managing their own social media, the number one most important thing you could possibly do is to treat your feed like a portfolio. I think anything that's on your actual feed should always be professionally shot, and everything else lives in your stories, and you should be leveraging stories as much as you possibly can. Remember that it'll go away in 24 hours, so it doesn't need to look perfect. In fact, the less perfect your stories look, the better they'll probably perform. But know that your feed is basically your mini website. And so your best work should be on the feed. You probably only need to post to your feed twice a week, and everything else should be living in stories.
What do you think about interior designers using infographics and those kind of devices on their feed?
I think interior designers who are using infographics are targeting lower budgeted projects because an infographic lends itself to a subconscious DIY method. And no matter what it is your infographic is sharing, it's teaching someone how to do your job. And so that's going to be going towards someone who is doing virtual design, who, someone is happy to implement the designs, but they need someone else to source everything. And I think that's amazing. I think that there's a huge market for it. And I think that more and more interior designers are expecting $500,000 budgets every time. So there's a huge opportunity for people who want to take smaller projects in that $25,000 realm. But infographics or graphics that have just graphics that have text that, have a graphic design element to it versus being an image, I think are great to post in stories and then save to highlights so that it's information that someone can get when they want to. But I think being in interior design, the most important thing you can do is showcase your latest, greatest work, evergreen content from projects that you've done before, but still aesthetically fit your goals, is the smartest way to use your time for social media.
That's great. Great distinction. Okay, we've touched on Design Camp in terms of, why you started it and some of those elements of the behind the scenes. But I'd love for you to now share before we kind of wrap up and kind of go into the last 10 questions I always ask everyone about what are some of the big lessons that you've learned through doing Design Camp. You've had some very high profile speakers, which you can share. Even with your podcast, you have a very high caliber of guests. I know with your website design, as you mentioned, you've recently done Amber Lewis's website. I was just listening actually to your interview with Jeremiah Brent, and you mentioned there you were doing Nate Burkess's website. So you're working with a very established clientele and getting an inside look into, a whole cross spectrum of very high profile businesses. What are some of the really big lessons that you've learned that maybe you even thought, oh, I didn't, yeah, that makes sense, but I didn't realize that beforehand? Or some of the insights that you have gained from doing these kind of projects and working with these types of people?
Well, thank you. Hearing you say it back to me is definitely just so flattering, and it's a great reminder because sometimes I'm just like so on to the next that I forget that like I am absolutely living my dream right now. So thank you. But yes, I still pinch myself all the time because I get to work with these people. And before I get into the things I've learned from them, I think my biggest lesson from kind of where I'm at in my career is to just ask and be really, really nice, because I am shocked by Amber Lewis saying yes to coming to our first design camp with a keynote speaker. I sent her a DM and she immediately responded and was like, "Yes, absolutely." I do have to remind you, I spend a lot of time growing those relationships and like growing those friendships so that I wasn't a completely cold DM coming in. Like Amber knew who I was because I had been following her and actively engaging with her content for so long. But the same with Jake Arnold. I didn't have a relationship with Jake outside of social media and asked him, and he said, "Yes, absolutely." So my first and biggest piece of advice is to just ask. The worst case scenario is that someone says no. The second worst case scenario is that they just don't respond. And neither of those things are anything that'll be of any sort of harm to you. But to really answer your question, the biggest things I've learned, and I feel like I'm learning the most in season 4 that I'm recording right now, and our most recent keynotes. We have design camp coming up here, and we're like 2 weeks out, and we have Heidi Callier, Amber Lewis is back, Julia Miller from Yond Interiors, just like amazing heavy hitters. But what I've really been learning is that at the level of work that they're doing and at the level of budget that they're working with, they are more flexible and more relaxed in their process because they have established a process for so long. And I think that that's been the most shocking and surprising to me. At design camp, we've always taught that like you have to have your processes in place, you have to stick to those processes. Your process is where your value is. And I do fundamentally believe that. However, Zoe Feldman's episode was so, so, so good. And she explained that her job is to make this the most pleasant and easy experience for her clients. And if that means that their homework is not a questionnaire because they don't have time to sit down and fill out your questionnaire, and it means you have to go sit at their house and ask these questions in person and handwrite the answers down to give to your team, then that's what you're going to do. And I think that what I've really learned from the people I admire most is that first and foremost, customer service is all that matters. And everything else you'll always be able to get the job done right if you are providing the best level of customer service. Another thing that I think, especially to designers who are newer or you're coming from another career, is that pricing your services is really fucking hard for everybody, no matter how long you've been doing it. And that you have to know how much you're spending, how much time you're spending on every project. So you do have to log your hours, but there does come a threshold in the overall project budget that a client's presenting that you're going to need to switch over from charging them hourly to charging a flat rate, and that it's going to be at different phases of your process, and that once you get to a really elite status and you're working on $10 million houses, it's going to be a flat rate for the design process. And once you get into project management and construction management and any sort of custom design work, for furniture pieces, or if you're custom designing wallpaper or any of that, that's all going to be hourly. But when someone is spending $250,000 on the design fees alone, they shouldn't be getting nickel and dimed for every time they get on a call that they're going to get a bill for that hour and a half they spent with you. That's something that has really shaken me to my core and understood helped me to understand what I need to get in place so that I can execute that and it still be financially viable for me and my business. Um, and I'd say the last thing that I've really learned is that the people that I look at and respect most are absolutely the kindest people in the business. And they're the people who are willing to say, yes, of course, I'll get on a call with you. And they'll take that call and they're not going to bill you or expect a favor back. I'm glad you brought up Jeremiah Brent because he is actively so, so kind and respectful and humble, even though he's been, having breakfast with Oprah for years now. And Amber is all will always get back to my emails whether I have a question about, maybe coming to design camp or being on the podcast. She'll always get back to me. And certainly all of these people have a guard dog at some point. So not every single inquiry is getting to them and not every single request is always going to be responded to. But it matters how you treat people and it matters how you speak not only to clients but to other people in the industry, because people are always listening. And the easier you are to work with, the easier it is for someone to want to work with you.
And so tell us, I mean, there's such amazing insights. Tell us, how often do you do design camp if somebody is interested in going to one? I mean, I think you had your most recent one announcement and I was like, oh, I'd love to go, but I don't know. I mean, I'm in Australia, it's another part of the world. How often do you do
Yeah.
them? And is it an annual or is it twice a year that you do them?
So we're still figuring out our cadence. Twice a year is our goal. Lindsay has been the best partner. My husband and I are family planning right now, and so we had planned to take this fall off. And so the one we're having in 2 weeks was going to be our only event. We are not pregnant yet. And so I called Lindsay the other night and I was like, I'm just looking at the calendar and it looks like we could squeeze in a design camp this fall because there's not going to be a baby. And so we might be having a second one this year. We're trying to figure out who we want to come keynote. So if you want to hear from someone, please send me a DM. I'd love to know who you'd like to hear from. But yeah, design camp is absolute magic. And every time leading up to it, I'm texting Lindsay and I'm like, we're never doing this again. It's so much work. Like I'm so stressed out. And then I get there and everyone is so open and kind and funny. And it's just such a safe space. It's just it it's a level of intimacy that even with very good social media friends, you just never get to. It's not the same as sitting in the same room with someone crying about how hard it is to be a mom and manage this business and this client that yelled at you and celebrate the fact that you got a contract signed that morning in your inbox. And you go through a lot in 4 days. And so by the time design camp is over, I ride a high for weeks after. And I'm like, of course we're doing this again. I could never not do design camp. So it's definitely an emotional roller coaster from the planning and logistics phase to like the final goodbyes when I'm crying, giving everyone hugs as they leave. Um, but I will always do it with Lindsay. She is the best business partner and she's so generous with her knowledge and she has her design team come and share every bit of her business in a level of generosity that I could only dream of being. She doesn't get the same longevity of design camp with potential clients the way I do. We work with design campers often after design camp, and Lindsay's an interior designer, and nobody's ever going to hire her because they're also interior designers. So to see her so willingly give the most intimate, proprietary details of her business to people is the most inspiring. She's perfect and a dream to experience. So I hope you do get to experience going to design camp with her someday. Um, but twice a year is the goal. Ultimately, we'll be on a cadence where one's in Austin and one's in Los Angeles, where Lindsay's based, because I just can't fathom doing this anywhere else because there's a lot of logistics to plan, meetings to have, and honestly, a lot of stuff that gets sent to our office in preparation for it. So I don't know if we'll ever expand beyond those two locations, but the proper hotel designed by Kelly Wersler is the perfect backdrop to design camp. So we will continue going there as long as they'll have us.
Amazing. And so if somebody is interested, what's the best way for them to sign up to be notified, and for future, I guess, sessions?
Definitely. So there's a sign up on the website. It's design-camp.co. But definitely follow us on Instagram because like we will let you know 3 weeks out before tickets go on sale, what the dates are going to be, where it's going to be. So you can, check your schedule to make sure it's going to work. And honestly, you just have to be ready to purchase the day that it goes on sale. So follow us on Instagram. That's design_camp_co. Um, Design Camp Co. Because we'll announce it there. Tickets will go on sale. And this last one sold out in like 45 minutes. And that just blows
Wow.
my mind. Um, a couple of tips to make it logistically more feasible. First of all, Natalie, we've had plenty of campers fly up from Australia, so that's not an excuse. We've actually had campers from every continent now except for Antarctica. So if you're in Antarctica listening, I would love to have you at design camp. But um the, there's a few things. So your hotel's not going to be included in design camp. We do that because we want people who are local to not have to pay for their hotel as well. So it makes it more accessible. We also really, really, really encourage people getting roommates. So if you're thinking about design camp and it's a big investment, which it absolutely is, we don't take that lightly by any means. Just know that you can share a room, you can stay off site, and you can really maximize your budget by being creative and not necessarily booking yourself a suite at the proper hotel if that's the only thing holding you back.
Okay, good tips. And we'll, of course, put all those links in the show notes. All right, let's get to the final little bunch of questions. You've been so generous with your time. I won't keep you much longer. So, first of all, which 5 words best describe you?
Busy, creative, um, inclusive, driven, and I hope thoughtful.
Yeah, great. What's one of the best lessons you've learned?
It's totally okay to try something and it not work out. And the only person who's going to remember that that happened is you. So never not do something because you're afraid of failing.
Yeah, so true. What's your proudest achievement or one of your proudest achievements?
This part always makes me cry, but being able to provide a really healthy salary to 20 women, most of them have kids at home so they can not only financially contribute to their household, but in many cases be the primary breadwinner to their household is the greatest privilege of my life.
Oh, that's beautiful. What's been one of your best decisions?
Mm, honestly, I think that getting the office space we're in right now, it's a mile from my house. I've never opted to work from home since getting this office space, and I had a lot of other offices before that. I I work long, long, long hours, and having a space to get to, I think, has really improved my quality of life, separating it from my couch at home.
Who inspires you?
I feel like I'm most inspired right now by designers who have been able to keep their studios small and boutique. Having a big team is the greatest privilege of my life. But when things get financially hard, having to make decisions that would affect that team is really, really, really hard and incredibly painful. And so I really am inspired by the Heidi Calliers of the world, the Julia Millers of the world, who have a very small, dynamic, nimble team and are so focused on their specific craft that they can withstand anything that the economy would throw at them.
Interesting. What are you passionate about?
I am passionate about financial independence for women. I my entire brand, whether it's products, services, or free content we provide, I never want a woman to have to make a decision out of fear of access to finances. I never want someone to not follow their dreams. I never want someone to stay in a relationship that is not healthy for them because they are afraid of not having money. And so everything we do is about providing access, understanding, and feasibility to finances for women.
What dream do you still want to fulfill?
I'd love to do a book. I would love to do a book. I have the whole thing outlined. I have the cover designed. Like I'm ready.
Oh, I'm so curious. I was wondering that actually earlier on if that was in the works for you, and yeah, maybe you can tell me your thoughts afterwards. I'd love to hear about it. Um, what are you listening to? Do you listen to podcasts? I presume you do.
Okay, this is a dark secret. I do not listen to podcasts. I had never listened to a podcast before starting our podcast. My team demanded it of me for 3 years and I finally gave in, and it was honestly because Jake Arnold said yes, he would come on the podcast. And I said, okay, I guess I'm doing a podcast. That has changed a little bit because we have a lake home that's almost 4 hours away. So it's a long drive through not very good cell signal. So I have been listening to podcasts, but it's definitely not what you'd expect. I absolutely listen to like true crime murder shows, and I don't listen to other shows in our industry. Part of it is because I like to stay in my lane and I like to make sure I'm not letting an interview that someone had with someone else sway the questions I ask in my own interview or formulate any opinion before I give that person a chance to tell me for themselves. So I'm not a podcast listener.
That's so funny. I love it though. Do you listen to audiobooks?
I don't listen to audiobooks. I have in the last 2 years, really focused and committed to reading 20 pages of a physical book every day. And I have stuck to that. I just finished Before We Were Innocent, but shocker, it was a true crime, teen angsty situation. So, like, that's definitely my genre.
That's funny. I was actually going to ask you, what are you reading? So true crime or that that genre as well?
It Yes, usually true crime, usually something that has a beautiful setting. I really like books that do talk about their their settings and their physical spaces, and I really love when the physical spaces are a character in the book itself.
And what about on your coffee table? What's on your coffee table at the moment?
Always design books. I feel so lucky that I've interviewed and made friends with so many people who have design books. So it's always a design book. And I usually try to keep it at a good 70-30% ratio. So 70% of them will be new releases, things that have come out in the last few months. And then I always try to keep a collection of 30% or so of them to be things that were in my grandmother's art history library so that I have some old references to go back to as well.
Love that. And finally, what piece of advice would you give to your younger self?
I think I would just tell myself to dream bigger. Like my younger self would have no idea what am actually doing now. Like never in my wildest dreams. And I just feel like if I had made decisions earlier, I wouldn't change anything that's happened. But if I had known where I was now, I think I would have been even gutsier and wouldn't have been making decisions out of will we make rent this month? And I'm just curious where I would have been now if I hadn't had those financial responsibilities or, hired people and had those families to care for as well. So yeah, just dream bigger.
Yep, I love that. That could very well be part of the title of this particular podcast because I really think that's a beautiful message. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, for being so giving of your time and your knowledge and your expertise. And yeah, it's been wonderful. I feel like I could talk for another 1.5 hours, if not longer, with you. So I've really enjoyed this. Thanks, Anastasia.
Well, thank you. It's so interesting being on the other side of the microphone. And it was such a joy to just hear how your brain works. And thank you for having me. I would love to talk with you more. So anytime you want to continue the conversation, just let me know.
All right. Thanks again. All of the links and info for this episode are at nataliewalton.com/podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so that you can get a direct download of the latest episode. And I really appreciate when you take a minute to rate and review, as well as share the love with someone you know who might benefit from this episode, or on social media. If you'd like to access a range of free resources, come visit my website, nataliewalton.com. Thank you to Jaeger Media for producing this podcast. And I would also like to acknowledge the people of the Bundjalung Nation where it was recorded, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I look forward to connecting again soon. I'm Natalie Walton, and you've been listening to Imprint.